I understand. I do this quite a bit, but I'd rather, can we do it just with the voice and you have a picture of me that we can give you?
Yes, that is fine too.
Okay. Shall we send, you have pictures from me from the web, from my site, just a moment. Let me see.
If you can do it from your side, it will be most welcome and appreciated. I'm quite technologically incapacitated, to say the least.
Yes, I'm sure that you are. Just give me a moment. Theodora, are you on?
I am on, yes.
Can you send him a picture? Can you send him a picture that he can use, please?
I will do that, yes.
Thank you.
Welcome to Dialogue Sessions on Capital Radio with myself, Doki Mohoto. How do you do today?
All right. But I appreciate what you are doing. And while we are waiting for the technical things to assist, let me just say that there are huge climate injustices, and we see them every day when the floods happen and when the fires happen, as has happened now throughout India and China and the United States. No one is spared these tolls. And South Africa, as you know very well, has a serious water crisis, which is linked directly to climate matters. So we are quite concerned. And it is a true emergency, whether the world is treating it as such or not. And I think it's through programs like yours that people will pay more attention to this.
Most definitely. And here where I am in sub-Saharan Africa, we've got a lot of drought, as you rightfully stated, but it's also leading to food insecurity. And it's such that countries that were faring quite well a few years back have now descended to poverty, and we're essentially quite concerned. And as you rightfully stated, Dr. Devra, this is indeed linked to climate injustice. Maybe as a way of introduction, do you mind just briefly sharing with our listeners who exactly is Dr. Devra, because your portfolio is quite illustrious, and I wasn't sure what to choose and which to leave out.
I began working on climate issues really in the 1980s and 90s. And when it became apparent that there were huge changes in weather that we could not explain except by activities of humans. And I worked with a team of researchers from the World Health Organization. In 1997, we published an analysis of fossil fuels and public health in The Lancet just before the Kyoto Conference of the Parties was held. And we presented our findings at the Kyoto Conference of the Parties. And those findings were that if you looked at all around the world at that time, and you projected in 1997, when many of your listeners were not yet born, you projected what the burning of fossil fuels would do in terms of particulate air pollution alone. We said that by 2020, there would be 8 million avoidable deaths every year. Now that number has been revised by the World Health Organization recently, because what we did not take into account in that estimate was the impact of burning dirty fuels indoors, as is very common still in South Africa. My colleague Kurt Smith from UC Berkeley was part of a team that revolutionized indoor cooking stoves so that they would be less dirty and less dangerous to people's health. So we were part of a team that worked on trying to promote awareness of the need to understand that fossil fuels, whether coal or peat or garbage that gets burned, has a huge impact on public health. And it can be deadly because not only does it immediately affect public health, but it contributes to the worsening of the greenhouse effect, and therefore the incredible increase that we're seeing now in climate change with increasing fires and, as you just said, food insecurity. Because when plants and farmers cannot rely on rain, we are unable to produce sufficient food in sufficient amounts for people who need it. The world right now actually has a lot of food, but it's not in the right places and it's not of the right quality at the right time.
I remember a movie back in 2012, which was titled the same year as well, where most of what we know as Earth life had changed owing to climate change. But it seems so many people still are left in the dark as to what is it exactly that causes this injustice to the environment. kindly explain that to us for the layperson to better understand?
Well, yes, let me say, I was part of the team that worked with Al Gore to write the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports. And those reports were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007 for years of work, some of which we did in South Africa, where we met both in Johannesburg as well as in Cape Town. And in that work, what we were able to document without any question was that policies of agriculture, and particularly cow farming and animal farming, contributed greatly to the instability of the food supply. We were able to show that large scale agriculture results in leaving land that can very easily flood, and that the cutting down of forests, whether in Indonesia or Brazil, results in the earth losing some of its lungs. The trees of the world are the lungs of the world because they take in carbon dioxide and give us oxygen. And every time we cut large amounts of trees down, we are diminishing the capacity of the globe to get fresh air itself. And what we know from the fires that have swept throughout the planet over the past couple of years is that no place is safe from the impact of these fires and now of the drought, which has caused large numbers of people throughout Africa and throughout the world to move to seek new housing. And so we have millions of environmental refugees, people who can no longer support themselves on their land, are being forced to move. And it's thought that this is one of the explanations for the conflict continuing in Sudan and even in Yemen, where large numbers of people do not have adequate food and water. And as a consequence, it's creating more civil strife in those areas as well. The team that I led worked with scientists from Harvard University, the World Health Organization in Geneva, and the World Resources Institute in Washington, D.C. And what we basically did was to say, what was the current pattern of use of fossil fuels in those areas of the world? We divided the world into 9 major areas. And then we said, what would happen if we reduced the burning of fossil fuels by just a small amount? And then what we were able to say is that if we were to reduce it, we would have been able to save lives. And unfortunately, right now, the world has moved in the wrong direction, particularly because in the past 4 years, the United States abdicated its role of leadership on this issue. And it was until the last administration, every administration in the United States, starting with George H.W. Bush, agreed that climate was a huge problem. But then we had the climate deniers, and that has left us with a dreadful toll in our country and your country and around the world.
Most definitely. There seems to be confusion as well with regards to climate change and global warming. Are these two diametrically opposed concepts, or the other births the other? Please explain.
Well, it's quite complicated, unfortunately, but it's also quite simple. We only have one planet. There is no planet B. And although there are billionaires that are trying to get us to Mars, we know that that is not a solution for our lifetimes. And as a consequence, the things that happen in Malawi have effects in Memphis, Tennessee. The things that happen in Tunisia have effects in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. We have one planet. When a butterfly beats its wings, those wings ultimately contribute to what's happening around the world. And what global warming refers to the fact that right now, for the past decade, the planet has experienced the warmest years in recorded modern history. That's the reality. Climate change refers to the change over specific periods of time in patterns that we see happening that affect, for example, precipitation, the amount of water that's not now in your water tables, or the fires that recently raged on Table Mountain, while those fires were caused by multiple factors, the fact that they raged so long and so fierce has to do with the fact that there was dryness in the trees and plants around there that was without precedence. We've never seen that kind of dryness. So there is both a local effect and a global effect. And that's what we're really, really concerned about here.
And also, I just want to zoom into the issue of climate injustice and its linkages to profiteering. Is this perhaps some of the reasons why we are seeing a less push from highly industrialized communities or nations to ensure that we save Mother Earth as we know it?
Well, there's no question that those who pay the highest price are the ones with the lowest amounts of resources when it comes to the impacts of climate. Look at what happens with the tsunamis that tragically hit Indonesia. Look what happens with the flooding in Bangladesh. The people who are living in coastal areas now have very limited resources for coping with major changes in sea level. And ultimately, we're going to have to adapt in the near term to the projected changes, which could result in several feet rise in sea level, so that coastal areas in the United States, South Africa, and around the world are going to have to either move inland or develop a technology for protecting themselves. And the capacity to develop technology is obviously more limited in rapidly developing countries that lack the resources to pay for those things.
I know.
So that is why I fully agree with you that the responsibility really should be borne by the developed nations, because we already polluted the environment with our development. And we have an obligation now to share with those who do not have those resources so that they can have access to more protected means of developing. Because it's not fair to tell other people, you can't develop now the way we did because the earth is polluted as a result of what we did. That's ultimately egregiously unfair. And so that is why it's important for countries that have been leading in this activity to do more. They have not done enough. There's no question about it.
I want to look at the global superpowers such as the United States and its stance recently when it snapped the Paris Accord. Does it appreciate and value the fact that its leadership could have stayed the hand of climate injustice, and such that we now have countries in Africa who suffer the consequences of highly industrialized nations and those with the means to change the fate of our earth, but have essentially dragged their feet, as it were?
I fully agree with you. This is not, it's not fair. It's not just. And that's why I'm one of many, many people working today. And frankly, we are following the youth of this world who are pointing out without hesitation the outrageous injustices that have been perpetuated under the current framework. And I think that there is a growing recognition of the need to do better and to do more. And that's why at the last G7 meeting, they featured some of the youth climate activists. And I think that the world is listening because they have no choice.
Is there a linkage in your estimation and professional opinion with regards to what we're seeing as 5G towers, in as far as weather modification and the weakening of the ionosphere, such that the radiation of the sun is heavily affecting us, and some are developing hypersensitivity to electromagnetic energy?
Well, let me be very clear. 5G does not yet exist in most places in the world today, right? And what 5G, let's talk for a moment about what 5G really is. What 5G is it's going to take millimeter waves and bring them close to you, but it has to do, in order to do that, it also has to bring 3G and 4G current technology, which usually is on towers far away from people, and bring it closer than ever, so that it is now being located instead of being on mountaintops, it's now being located right potentially on your bedroom wall. That's what 5G will be. Fortunately, 5G does not yet exist, but in fact, there have been analyses done by the Small Cell Forum that predicts that if 5G does get installed, the number of base stations will reach 70.2 million in 2025, and the number of all small cells will be 13.1 million. That is incredible. When you add all of that together, we're talking about millions of new antennas that will have the capacity to beam 3G, 4G, and 5G at the same time into devices. And a 5G base station, according to a report in a major industry publication called the IEEE Spectrum, a 5G base station is expected to consume at least 3 times as much power as a 4G base station. Now think about it. If you're consuming more power, where are you getting the energy from? You're burning more fossil fuels. So that is why a number of experts in this field have said that introducing massive amounts of 5G with an additional 1,000 watts of power per sector is going to result in massive amounts of increased burning of fossil fuels. And this will be for a host of units that have to be produced and have to be maintained. And so as a consequence, there's a threat here that no matter how much efficiency you might get with 5G, and we don't know, but you are going to get such an increase in demand for it that the increase in demand is going to outswamp any increase of efficiency. And that, let me read you a quote from Dexter Johnson in the IEEE Spectrum. A lurking threat behind the promise of 5G delivering up to 1,000 times as much data as today's network is that 5G could also consume up to 1,000 times as much energy. So what are we doing? We need to have a reset, a national and international conversation about what 5G is, because currently 5G is usurping and it will overtake energy consumption. We'll get 61 times more energy consumed just for 5G.
Wow. Quite scary when you think of it. But I just wonder, Dr. Devra, isn't this also in a way owing to our overly weird consumption of technology, which largely so far has been on social media platforms? Doesn't it in a way create an insulated, isolated world where we are detached from Mother Nature, such that perhaps this is what's driving some apathy towards climate justice and more citizens advocating for justice and less interventions in as far as the decimation of planet Earth is concerned?
You're absolutely correct. And in fact, one estimate is that because we have, all of us, become so addicted to technology, that there's going to be a dramatic increase such that 1/5 of all of the world's power is going to go to support data centers by 2025. So we need to reset and rethink what we're doing. We are addicting younger and younger children to technology, and more teachers are recognizing that children do not learn, particularly young children do not learn with computer screens in front of their faces for hours a day. Their young children learn with teachers and pencils and crayons and looking people in the eye and direct contact. And so this year of the pandemic has compromised the learning of an entire generation of young people. There's no question about it. At the same time, what we have to recognize as well is that many of the devices that people think are essential are not. And many of the apps that people have on all the time really are energy hogs. And one of the biggest energy hogs for all of the apps is Netflix, because Netflix is usually used with streaming wirelessly. It doesn't have to be. On our website at ehtrust.org, that's ehtrust.org, we have information about how you can wire your home, wire your computer so that you can download whatever you want to watch wired to your device then put your device on airplane mode and watch whatever you want to watch. That is a safer, smarter way for you and your children to use any of these devices. And we recognize that these devices are not toys, should not be given like candy to children, are not appropriate holiday presents or birthday presents for kids, and that 5G can have a devastating effect on the environment because the technology itself is increasing energy demand and the demand for more electronic devices. And as you know, one of the things necessary for these devices are conflict minerals. Conflict minerals, many of which have been mined in Africa by boys that have been forced to work, sometimes as boy soldiers. Those conflict minerals are in these devices. And the more devices you have, the more mining there will be for these things. But if you look at the apps that we use, even now, if we were on a Zoom video as opposed to audio, the demand for energy is very, very high. And so we need to rethink what we are doing to improve our resilience. And there are organizations now trying to improve this so that if we use our cameras less and our voices more and connect more in real life, we will be actually protecting the planet.
That sounds simple enough, but I wonder though, in terms of applicability, given the addiction that we see of our youth, pop culture, which is largely seen through streaming platforms, social media, technological applications even, which are essentially turning us into cyborgs and a people that is less in control of its own destiny and reliant on technocrats. Are we likely to see a degree of us turning into a zombie nation or zombie society?
Oh,
Given our
well, you know, your language is very colorful and it's probably quite spot on. But you know, I remain an optimist, or else I couldn't work in this field. And I believe that if we give people the right information, they will suddenly wake up. And I'm hoping that through your voice and those of others in South Africa, for example, when you are interviewing people next, since you are a radio program, it would be good for everyone to be on audio because people don't realize how much more energy is being consumed with video. And video is important, right? But I know that you can be wired in your station because you have to be, but many people are not. And I think getting the world more wired, reducing our demand, recognizing that a lot of what 5G is hype, that you do not need a lot of the technology that is out there right now. We certainly do not need wireless diapers and wireless breast pumps or wireless speakers to play music into the vagina, and I'm not making that up, for the unborn baby. Many of the technologies that we have, and these can be found on our website at ehtrust.org, many of these technologies are just silly and wasteful. And if people start to ask, whenever there's a new app or a new technology, do I need it? Is it going to make my life better? Or is it going to make me more depressed and more anxious because I'm going to constantly need to check it? As we know from documentaries that are coming out now, software has been programmed to make us anxious and need to check how many, quote, friends do we have? How many likes do we have? Those are not real measures of humanity. Those are things that we have been now conditioned to like, and we can become conditioned not to like, because we can understand that we're giving up more than we're gaining by having these kinds of technologies permeate our lives.
That's quite interesting. I also noted with some concern when some very prominent billionaire suggested that he has built an artificial sun. And I also went further into researching this, and I noticed that also in one Asian country, I think it's in South Korea, I stand corrected, they've actually built their own artificial sun. To what degree do you feel that some are intentionally desecrating Mother Earth? Because the assumption we have other technologies or alternatives that we can rely on or be addicted to.
I think this is an example of incredible hubris of technology. And we are in danger of living with a technological imperative. Just because you can do something technologically, like try to build an artificial sun, does not mean that you should. And by the way, I don't believe that the artificial sun is feasible, because if you produced an artificial sun, you would burn yourself up, because proximity to the heat alone would make anything perish. But the fact that we have the capacity to create something technologically does not mean that we should do so. It does not mean that we should do so. And we really need to be more aware of that and stop our tragic march toward increasingly expanding what technology is doing, because we have to recognize that technology is only a tool for humanity and should never be a rule for humanity. And that's a very, very important thing that we have to do a better job of educating our children and ourselves about.
Wildfires recently we saw in California, as you rightfully stated, in Cape Town. We saw in Australia as well. And some weather patterns are currently being seen all over the world, which clearly proves that something is amiss. But why do you sense that people are still not following the science or listening to the science being given to us by Mother Nature?
That is a failure in public education. And it's a failure all over the world, because public relations experts are often at the front of where we get our information. Most of the large energy companies spend much more money on public relations than they spend on research to improve the technologies and find alternatives. That's been true whether it's for the tobacco industry or the pesticide industry or the energy industry. The amounts of money spent by BP on their campaign beyond petroleum far exceeded any amount of money they spent on the research to develop greener energy. So we have to call that out where we see it and when we know about it. And that's why programs like yours are important. And that's why Environmental Health Trust is pleased to provide information about these and other avoidable environmental health issues. Because if the demand continues to go up for these devices, then there will be more and more networks, more and more towers built, and more radiation. But if people start to say, I don't need my coffee pot to talk to my washing machine, to talk to my door alarm and my garage door opener, if people start to say, wait, I don't need this technology, then there'll be a rethinking of what we need to put out into the environment. For example, in China today, 5G is being turned off at night because the government in China recognizes people don't want 5G. They're not buying the new devices, because for 5G to really work, you need a 5G phone and a 5G computer and a 5G router. And even when it says on your phone 5G, it's not truly a 5G network. It's simply getting a signal that is 5 gigahertz, which is distinct from a 5G network. That's far too complicated for me to explain right now. And again, more information about all of this can be found on our website at ehtrust.org.
Fossil fuels industrialization, some went as far as saying overpopulation is to be blamed for climate change. But what else really is at the cause of the fast pace of the Earth's self-destruction, according to your professional opinion?
You know, I don't think I can answer your question fully, because I don't know enough about all the things that need to be known. But I do know this. When the leaders of this world understand better than they do now the gross impact that current policies are having on all of us, then we will be better off. And that's why I'm hoping that through public education and the kinds of research that my colleagues are doing to show that burning of garbage and burning indoors in a home is endangering people's health, that research is really, really important. And what we do know is this, This is not a problem that's going to be solved by individuals, no matter how virtuous they may become. This is not a problem that's going to be solved by people saying, I'm not going to ever fly on an airplane again. We need to make airplanes greener. We need to figure out and make incentives for fuels to become safer. And there are pushes to do this at major institutions of technology around the world. And there are people who recognize it increasingly. But we've got to stop accepting the idea that all we need is more and more, better and better wireless technology. Wireless technology puts all of us at risk. There are some people who are exquisitely sensitive to wireless technology and to electromagnetic fields. They know who they are because they have a hard time living in the modern world. Most people are not aware that they're being exposed to wireless radiation, but all people respond to it. And that's made most clear by studies that have been done for men who keep phones in their pockets. Those who keep phones in their pockets the most have the lowest sperm count and the most sperm damage. There's no question about it. It's been established at different research institutions around the world. And yet, despite that established fact, people are not aware of the issue generally. And that's why I welcome a chance to talk about this, and also to make sure people understand that if a phone is on next to your body, it's sending radiation to the tower up to 900 times a minute with a handshake. Where are you? Here I am. Where are you? Here I am. We now have studies on colorectal cancer in children, and we're finding colorectal cancer has quadrupled under the age of 40 in the United States, in England, in Egypt, and Iran. And all of those nations, young people have phones right in their back pockets or their front pockets, and the radiation is going into the rectum. And we are seeing a big increase in this very rare and often fatal cancer in young people because of this. So we need to do a better job of educating people about these risks and getting people to understand the only way to safely carry a device that's wireless on your body is when it's turned off or on airplane mode.
There seems to be a growing international lobby against environmental injustice. You rightfully stated from the time of Al Gore to advocates like yourselves, but one is forced to ask, are we winning the fight yet, or there's still more work to be done?
Of course, there's much more work to be done. And again, I think that the children, to me, they are children, the young people, the teens that are speaking out, we need to listen to them more because we have made a mess and they want to make sure that it doesn't keep getting messier. And I think that I remain encouraged by the fact that there are more young people who are saying no to continuing some of the patterns that we began.
And also, not so long ago, as you rightfully stated once more, South Africa was threatened by the water shortages or droughts that we saw engulfing the country and neighboring states even. Does this mean that we are nearing day zero, where there'll be no turning back for humans on Earth, in as far as us destroying the Earth and not being cognizant of the cries of Mother Nature and how we are essentially decimating resources we need for our own survival?
I'm afraid that that is correct, and that it's important for people to organize and figure out ways to provide rationing and distribution of the limited resources that are there, and to recognize that water is a very, very precious and limited resource in South Africa. And this will require big thinking and big and bold actions by your government, but by the world as well. By the world as well, because South Africa is paying a price because of policies that have been pursued by other countries for many, many years. And that's why the Paris Accord at least starts a process, but it's got to be more than that, because the Paris Accord, while it's a good thing, it's not enough. It's not enough. And in order for us to do a better job, we need to go beyond that, and we need to do it soon.
I noted also with dismay when Nestle, the global fast-moving consumer goods conglomerate, suggested that water privatization may be a way to go, And I also saw that some countries have also started trading in water. Water is now a futures commodity that they can trade with. What is your opinion on this matter? And are we allowing corporate behemoths to decide the fate of humanity?
I'm afraid I cannot comment on that, except to say that whether in the Middle East or in Africa, water can be a source of great dispute and even lead to wars. Water is more important in the Middle East than almost anything else because it's so scarce. And how to create better access to water all over the world, it frankly is something that I don't have an answer to. But I think you start solving these problems by naming them. And the fact that we have a severe water shortage, that we are nearing to day zero, and that South Africa was close to running out of water, that should be a wake-up call for everyone. And I'm going to have to finish this call shortly because I have two wonderful young granddaughters that are waiting to see me. And I want to thank you for your leadership and raising this issue. There is a very important effort underway now to seek climate justice and recognize that we have climate injustice.
Most definitely. And indeed, I was also about to suggest that we allow you to go about your business. And thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your professionalism. And most importantly, for your advocacy work and continuing to always shine the spotlight on these pressing international issues. Do enjoy the day ahead, Dr. Davis. And we celebrate you and continue to look at you in awe and wish that your years may be expanded so that we continue enjoying from your well of wisdom.
Thank you. As we have an expression in Jewish folklore, from your mouth to God's ears.
Most definitely. And you were with my sister Kimohoto on the dialogue sessions on Capital Radio.
88.1
All right.
FM.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Do take care.
Bye.